I like to start these things with a story, and so while we just wait for the last people to come in, I'll tell you a story. For those of you who don't know, when I do talks, I like to start by humiliating myself. I do it for two reasons. The first reason is so that you understand why this is an important topic for me, and secondly, so that you feel sorry for me and vote me highly in the red, green, and blue. So hopefully both of those are going to happen. So I'll tell you a story about why I put this talk together. I had the misfortune of moving into leadership very, very early in my career. I say misfortune because by the time I was 24 years old, I had a team of 10 people. What 24-year-old knows how to be an employee, let alone be a leader of people? And so I made a whole bunch of mistakes, massive amounts of mistakes. And this was one of them. I was running a team, quite a small team at the time. I had a senior engineer, there was me, the lead engineer, and there was a mid-level engineer. And we were discussing how to build a particular solution. We knew what the problem was. We were just ideating and coming up with what the solution could be, planning the architecture. So there's me as the lead engineer and the senior engineer. We're just going for it, we're discussing this, it's getting intense, it's getting assertive. It was not aggressive, but it was definitely assertive. Loud, raised voices, body language. And I didn't realize at the time that the mid-level engineer was not engaging with us. They were sat back in their chair, just watching me and the senior going at it. When I reflected on this later, I thought, great, I'm a leader. I know what this is. This is a perfect opportunity to teach somebody about assertiveness. A few years later, thinking back on this with even more experience, one of the things I didn't mention was that the mid-level was actually a female engineer. And what I'd done was reinforce a stereotype without even realizing it. This caused me so much shame that I actually reached out to that person and apologized many years later. But what I didn't realize at that time was there was a conflict going on, but two types of conflict at the same time. Me and the senior were having a healthy conflict. Me and the junior, or the mid-level, was having an unhealthy conflict. And the difference between these two took me a while to really unpick in my mind and to try and describe how you can have this situation where there's a difference between the conflict that's occurring and actually have an unhealthy and a healthy conflict at the same time. So that's what we're going to discuss. So pretty much this is what the talk is going to be today. We're going to go through the definition of what unhealthy conflict is, what healthy conflict is, why do we want healthy conflict? One initial thought could be, let's just eradicate conflict entirely. That's a bad thing, and we'll talk about why that's a bad thing. And then how do we, if we understand the difference between the two, how do we make sure that only healthy conflict arises, and if we have time, how to move an unhealthy conflict to a healthy conflict. So, other thing, I'm sorry for the text. This is not going to be a monologue. Interruptions are expected and even encouraged. Please ask me a question, ask for clarification. One thing I don't like is knowledge transfer. I don't want to give you knowledge. I want you to do something with it afterwards. And for you to do something with it afterwards, you've got to ask me questions. You've got to understand it at a deeper intrinsic level. And so if I stand here for 45 minutes and talk at you, that's not going to work. So please engage and respond to me. So you're also probably thinking, who is this person stood on the stage in front of you? So I'm Andrew Murphy. I'm a long-term father to a flock of chickens, or as we call them in Australia, chucks. Short-term father to a flock of children, or as we call them in Australia, financial burdens. And I love travel, I love getting around. I used to have a goal pre-COVID of visiting 2 new countries every year. When I say that in Australia, because I'm originally from the UK, when I say that in Australia, Australians look at me with this shocked look on their face. 2 new countries every year. All the Europeans in the audience now thinking, well, yes, you just drive in a circle. I managed to keep that up until COVID, and actually this year, so thank you, Portugal. Portugal is my 4th new country this year, so I am back on track to having an average of 2 new countries every year. From a professional point of view, I've been an engineer for pretty much 20-odd years at this point, been paid to write code for about 20 years. And like I said, I got into leadership super, super early. And it gave me an experience which, in some ways, I'm really valuable experience, and in other ways, it's an experience I don't want other people to have, because I had to learn everything the hard way. When I first became a leader, there was no resources, there was nobody doing conferences like this and having people talking about the job of being an engineering leader. I had to make all the mistakes myself. So I'm really grateful that I get the opportunity to stand in front of you and talk about this type of stuff, because it's an opportunity I didn't have. So thank you, NDC, and all of the conferences. Okay, so this is the point where I remind you that this is not a monologue, and this is a conversation. So in your mind, when you think of conflict, techos, don't worry, I will repeat what people say for the stream. When you think of conflict, what does that conjure in your mind? What can cause a conflict? Difference in opinion, definitely. Different values. Oh, I like that one. Yeah. Misunderstandings, yeah. Different experiences, definitely. Different pace. That's great. I like that. Yeah, the speed at which you work, the speed at which you go through problem solving, that's great. Sorry? Different interests. Ooh. Yeah, I guess you could have a situation where, oh, I'm really interested in learning about this technology, but this other person isn't, and we can have a conflict because I want to use it because it's interesting, and they think it's not the right fit. Insecurities. Yes. Sorry? Ego. Oh, I can tell you all about ego. I had such an ego as a young engineer. It makes me shiver when I think what I was like. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Stress. Yeah. Last one. Ooh. So being a technical leader of somebody, and maybe they have more experience than you, yeah, that can definitely cause conflict. We'll circle back to that one, because that's quite an interesting topic. The way that I like to think about it is whenever there's a situation where there's high stakes or high emotions. So if the result of something, this is meant to be lovely and colored, I think it's just washed out with the screen. So whenever there's high stakes or high emotions in a situation. So if the result of something that's going to happen is going to have a big impact on the team, or the project, or the client, or the individual, it can lead to a conflict. But also if there's high emotions involved in the situation, it can also lead to a conflict. So these two things in your mind, high stakes, high emotions. So, if we're debating languages and the way we do it, the stakes of that is quite high. If we decide to choose one particular language or framework or cloud, and it was the wrong choice, huge, high stakes. But also, people can get emotionally invested in the technologies. So that can cause a conflict. Another one is knowledge hoarding. Does anybody know what I mean by knowledge hoarding? Yeah? Does somebody want to, what does it mean? Yeah, if I'm the only person that knows this, nobody can take my job away from me. Sometimes termed mortgage-driven development. This is a huge problem in our industry because we often feel like we're valued based on what we know. I could do an entire talk on how that is wrong. As engineers, you're not. I did do an entire talk on why that's wrong. You're not valued on what you know, you're valued on what you can do. And so knowledge hoarding is this weird quirk of industries like ours, where we feel like we need to hoard the knowledge because we feel like we're hoarding the value when we become more valuable. Is there any other ones that people want me to double-click on and talk about more? I'm just going to choose one if you don't. denying promotions, I mean, like that one, obviously that can lead to conflict. You know, if you've got a discussion with somebody where you're going to tell them that you're not going to give them the promotion, there's high stakes involved in that, and there's obviously high emotions involved in that. Any others? Code review. So again, we've got this idea that we're attaching emotions to things, and this is my code, and I'm telling you why your code is wrong. And this idea that we attach emotions to it is what can lead it to a conflict. And we'll talk in a minute about how there's a separation between those two things. Lastly, roadmap and sprint planning. You know, if we've got a road mapping session coming up, what should we do? What should we not do? How much tech debt should we pay down? Should we build this feature or that feature? These can be high stakes because we're defining the thing that we're actually doing and producing as a team, but there can be high emotions because somebody could have a lot of their personal sense of self on building a particular feature because they've sold it to the executive leadership. And so all of these things can cause conflict. So that then begs the question. I titled this talk, Building a Culture of Healthy Conflict. So what do I mean by healthy conflict? If all conflict is not bad, then what's the difference between conflict that is bad and conflict that is good in a team? These are the three things that define the difference between when conflict is healthy and when conflict is unhealthy. If we have aligned goals and outcomes that are defined in the people that are having the conflict, you're likely to have a healthy conflict. If you have misaligned goals, you're likely to not be in a healthy conflict and have an unhealthy conflict. If two people are trying to pull in opposite directions, chances are it's going to be an unhealthy conflict. If you don't have trust and respect in the people that are having a conflict with each other mutually, then you're likely to have an unhealthy conflict. The discussion is going to be less about the ideas and less about the code and more about the person that wrote it. Great question. We'll come back to that. Lastly, negative or positive intent. If you assume that the other person wants to get the same things as you and has a positive intent to what they're trying to achieve, then you're likely to have a healthy conflict. If you assume that the person you're in conflict with isn't having positive intent, you're going to lead down the wrong track to an unhealthy conflict. And this can really be summarized in one way, which is in unhealthy conflict, people win. And in healthy conflict, ideas win. This, I want you to really cement in your mind. If you ever leave a conflict with somebody and you think, oh, Jessica won that argument, or Barry won that argument, it's probably an unhealthy conflict. If you ever leave a conflict and you think, oh, Jessica won that argument because her idea was the best idea, it's probably a healthy conflict. Yes? Yeah. Sure. So I'll give you an example. Let's say often intention goes back to goals and outcomes. If you've got somebody that you're having a conflict with and you don't know if they're trying to achieve the same outcomes as you, you can start to assume negative intent. So let's say you're an engineering manager and you're in a conflict with the product manager. If you believe that you're both trying to build the best product for the users and get something out there that gets traction and means the business is successful and genuinely helps the users, you've got the same goal and you're likely to assume positive intent. If you don't know that the product manager is doing that and you suspect that maybe their promotion is on the line if they get this feature in the roadmap and built, then you can start assuming negative intent. So it's a useful check for you, as if you don't know what somebody's goals and outcomes are, that's when you can start leading down the line of assuming negative intent. So it's always useful for you to truly understand what the other person is trying to achieve with the conflict. Does that help?
How do you steer everything you said with culture?
What was the last bit?
Culture. Because in some countries, people are more submissive, let's say that, and other countries, people are more imposive.
We are going to come on to that. So the question was basically, how do you deal with this situation when you've got different cultures and places where people are more aggressive? So like I said in the start, I was born in the UK, but I live in Australia. That's a very different cultural way of approaching problems. If you've ever done business with English people, there's always two conversations going on at once. There's what they say and what they actually mean. In Australia, those are actually pretty close to each other, and that was quite a cultural shock for me, was to go to Australia and actually have people tell me what they actually think and feel about me. We'll definitely circle back to that. Okay, so I've told you what healthy conflict is and what unhealthy conflict is, and the difference between the two. Before we kind of go into a little bit of how we actually do this, I just want to make sure that we're all in the same place of, why do we actually want conflict? What are the benefits of a healthy conflict in a team?
Probably don't care enough about it.
Yeah, if you don't have conflict, you're probably not coming up with the best ideas, you're probably not discussing it, and the conflict is probably still happening. You just are not aware of it. Anybody else?
It's good to avoid groupthink.
Yeah, groupthink. So groupthink is a big problem, especially when you've got a team that have worked together for a very, very long time. There's this kind of interesting friction and challenge. Like, we want long-running teams because it takes a while for people to work well together and to get to know how everybody works, but you've also got the counterbalance of groupthink starts setting in when you have a teams working together. Got another comment?
It actually brings the team together. It does. It's a by-effect, though. But yeah.
Yeah.
But also, of course, the opposite. It brings it further apart. If it's not healthy. So.
Sure. Yeah. Healthy conflict can help a team actually mold together. And somebody was doing a talk. Anwan did a talk earlier in this room, and he talked about how one of the things he does is be vulnerable with people, because being vulnerable with people actually connects you with them. And actually having a healthy conflict and get everything out there and discussing it as a group means that you actually have to a certain extent, be vulnerable, and that can build team cohesion. Last comment, JK?
Like having healthy boundaries, like
Sure.
needing to work while on holidays.
Having healthy boundaries, not having to work while on holidays. That feels like that comes from the heart, JK. I definitely know that one. Yes, yeah. So these are my ideas of why we need healthy conflict. Improves problem solving, exactly what we said earlier. We come up with the best ideas when we have the most number of people in the room discussing those ideas. There's been research that time and time again shows you that diversity of thought and diversity of life experience gives you diversity of problem solving. It's a fact, and this is how we solve groupthink. Team cohesion, we've discussed that. Encourages accountability. So this is a really interesting thing. If you've got, has anybody ever been in a conflict and then at the end of that conflict just thought, oh, well, I didn't really want to do it that way, but now we're doing it that way, so if it screws up, it's not my fault. You don't need to put your hands up. I know I felt that. And so, if you have an unhealthy conflict, that can lead to those kinds of thoughts and feelings. If you have a healthy conflict where everybody is putting their ideas forward, we're debating those ideas, and we're deciding together what to do, everybody feels bought into that decision. And so everybody feels accountable for the outcome. Has anybody heard of a cognitive bias called the IKEA effect? Do you want to say what it is? Just wait for the microphone. Sorry, Tex, you're going to hate me. I'm doing this in the next talk.
I think what this is that if you build something yourself, like with your own hands, you put more value into it. So like IKEA sells you a cheap product, and you spend 20 minutes building it with your hands, and then you think it's good.
Exactly, 100%. So the experiment they did was they got a bunch of people together, and they asked them to build IKEA furniture. Then they asked them to value that furniture in terms of dollars. They got another group of people to come in and then value that same furniture afterwards, that didn't build it. The group that built the furniture consistently valued it 20% higher than the group that didn't build it. Because we had this cognitive bias that disproportionately weights the things in which we've been the creators of. And so by encouraging people to have conflict, healthy conflict, you can have them actually engage with this kind of stuff. I was once working on changing the whole product development lifecycle of a company that I worked at. And there was me, who was the engineering director, and there was my counterpart, the design director. I had a manager who, let's just say, was a challenging manager to deal with, and had very strong opinions. In this program of changing the product development process, I involved this manager in those meetings. And as soon as I told my engineering director that, he rang me up on the phone straight away and said, Murph, why have you put this person in this workshop? They're going to cause so much problems in this workshop. And I said, yes. I'd rather them be on the inside fighting out than the outside fighting in. So actually choosing to involve people who you know are difficult people to work with in those types of discussions can help them feel accountable. It worked, yes. Fosters innovation. We've got this idea of coming up with stuff. I'm not going to go through all of these. Any others somebody wants me to double-click on before we go on? No? Cool. Okay, so I've talked what they are. Now let's imagine we're in one of these. We're in a conflict. You and a team member, you and a peer, you and a boss, you and a direct report, you're in a conflict. How do you know in the moment if it's a healthy conflict or an unhealthy conflict? Think back to my story in the beginning, where there was me and the senior, and us and the mid-level. What was the difference that I could observe to tell me that I was having a healthy conflict with the senior, but an unhealthy conflict with the mid-level? Engagement. Yeah, engagement. Safe dialogue. Two very important words. Safe dialogue. What does dialogue mean? It means not a monologue. It means if one person is talking the entire conflict, it's not a dialogue. It might as well have been an email because they've already made the decision. If you've got people talking and discussing an equal sharing of ideas and concepts and there's free-flowing discussion, it's a dialogue. So if one person is talking, it's not a healthy conflict. Safe. What does safe mean? Psychologically safe. Do people feel like they can share their discussions, their ideas? Do they feel like they've got a seat at the table? They might physically have a seat at the table, but do they have a vocal seat at the table? Do they feel like their ideas are going to get listened to, or do they feel like their ideas are going to get dismissed just because of who they are, not the ideas they have? What does that look like? What does a lack of safe dialogue look like? Sorry? When it's about personalities. Yeah, so actually there's two distinct styles of lack of safe dialogue. And we've got one type of style, which is withdrawing dialogue. So, if you and I are having a conflict and I kind of sit back and do that, that's me withdrawing dialogue. I've decided that there's no point in me discussing this anymore. I'm just going to withdraw. The other type is forcing dialogue. So instead of going like this, I go like this. You literally, figuratively lean forward. This can happen quite often. In person, it's a bit harder to to see remotely. Who feels like they're more of the withdrawing dialogue type person? Who feels like they're more of the forcing dialogue type person? Who feels like it changes depending on who they're conflicting with? It changes depending on who you're conflicting with. Often when there's a power dynamic, and you're in the lower set of the power dynamic, people tend to defer more to withdrawing dialogue as opposed to forcing dialogue. But that's not a given. That's, human behavior follows patterns, but an individual human will land anywhere on the spectrum. So you can understand that these things are patterns, and that across a population distribution, people will do relative things, but an individual will do their own individual thing. So it's really important that you recognize and have this background thread running in your head of not just the conflict that's happening, but how people are responding to the conflict. Who's actually a leader in this room? Yeah, it's your job to do this, sorry. It's your job to not just be engaged in the actual debate itself, but to be watching the debate and to be understanding if this is a safe dialogue or not. As part of what we need to do, as leaders, we're not always the best engineers. I certainly am not the best engineer, but it's my job to make sure that the best engineers come up with the best solutions. And so I need to be focusing more on the form of the debate than the actual debate itself. Remotely, this is really hard to find, especially if you have cameras off or you're doing a debate over something like Slack, Huddle. This is really hard to find out. I actually think that cameras should be on for this type of stuff. I know that that's not always a thing. I'm an introvert. I'm stood on a stage in front of 150 people. I'm still an introvert. I don't like my camera being on, but it really helps with this kind of stuff. Okay. Oh. I always forget to take pictures. My social media person told me she was going to do this, and I completely forgot. So here we go. Are you ready? There we go. Thank you very much. Okay. Back to the talk. Okay. So let's talk about what you do when an I bet I'm going to have to check my other slides because I've got another talk I'm doing this afternoon. I bet she's done the same thing. So what do you do when an unhealthy conflict arises? Like we've recognized it. We've seen unsafe dialogue or a safe monologue, which is still a conflict. How do we actually move this situation? Let's discuss long-term first. How am I doing for time? I tend to get passionate about this stuff, and then I forget what I'm doing and how much time I've got. Cool. All right. So let's talk long-term. How do we actually resolve this stuff long-term? Because I titled this talk a culture of healthy conflict. How do we breed that culture? Well, it comes back to this thing. If you remember when I went through this is the definition of unhealthy versus healthy conflict. So we've got to find ways to build these structures into our teams to allow us to have more of the things on the right and less of the things on the left. I'll give you a few examples of this. Often in companies, we have competency matrices or capability frameworks that tell you how to get promoted. Whose company has like one of these documents that tell you how to move from a mid-level to a senior? Not as many as I expected. If you don't have one, get one. They're great. To move, so you might define something that says the difference between a mid-level and a senior is that the senior is the driving force behind a technology shift. So we're going to move from N-Hibernate to Entity Framework Core, or we're going to implement Neo4j or something. And a senior has to be somebody who works through one of these changes and one of these technology shifts and supports it, strategizes it, and implements it. How can that lead to conflict? How can that lead? This person now has a different goal than the rest of their team. Their goal is to implement this technology, not because it's the best choice for the team, but it's the best choice for them to get promoted. So having that in there and having that understood means that you need to be really careful if you're defining a framework or you're having a one-to-one with somebody in your team and you're saying to them, this is how you get promoted, you have to do this thing. It can lead to some really negative behavior if you don't do it well. If that's the way you want to do it, this is where regular one-on-ones with that person, regular one-on-ones with the rest of the team, and you're open about this kind of stuff. You know, this is going to be really great for Samantha's professional development, that she drives this technology shift, and talking to your team about that. Mutual respect and trust. There's no shortcut to trust. You can't just flick a switch and suddenly everybody in your team trusts each other. It doesn't work like that. We're humans, we're by nature tribal. We have to develop trust over time. What that means is it has to be a focus of everything we do, is how do we build trust into what we're doing as a team? How are we doing things that reinforce trust and don't erode trust? So are you building social things into work that are the right balance between that? You know, we don't, mandated fun time is not what we want, but you know, we want to do things that are fun and engaging. Humans build trust through personal interactions. This is a really difficult one, again, remotely. I'm sounding like I don't like remote work. I love remote work. It just makes a whole heap of this kind of stuff more complex. Trust is difficult to build remotely because you don't get those water cooler moments. Every time we have a discussion with somebody remotely, it tends to be transactional in nature. I'm talking to you because I want something from you. We've got a meeting in the calendar where we're going to discuss so and such. In person, we turn up to meetings 2 or 3 minutes early. We chat for a little bit. We go out for coffee after the meeting. These things happen less often remotely, and they're really important for building trust. So one of the things that I always do with my teams is I always put the calendar invite for 5 minutes before, just see who turns up, just have a chat. Or just find ways to discuss and chat with people, talk about things that are not work. It builds trust. It's the only way you can build trust. If you only ever have transactional conversations with somebody where you're talking to them because they want something from you, do you think that they're going to be excited when they see your name pop up on Slack? They're not. So we need to build these things in place. And back to the discussion on positive intent. A big driver of positive intent is the first two. Pretty much if you have aligned goals and outcomes and mutual respect and trust, positive intent tends to come along for the party. Cool. All right. So that was long term. Let's do short term. Okay, this is a QR code. Scan the QR code while I take a sip of water. More like half a bottle of water. It's very warm in here. Okay, so what this is a worksheet. When I do talks, I like to give you something to take away, because I know that you've given me an hour of your precious time to stand here and listen to me talk. And I don't want you to walk away and in 2 weeks' time go, what did that weird Englishman with the red shirt tell me? I've completely forgotten about it. So I like to give people things to take away that they can actually use. So this is a worksheet that when you feel like you're approaching an unhealthy conflict, you can use to resolve the conflict and to go back into a more healthy conflict. So it's based on a framework that I like to call the pause framework, because the first thing you should do if you find that you're in an unhealthy conflict is pause, stop. So many mistakes in conflicts happen because we just barrel on forwards, we just keep running. We just think, if I just talk quicker, if I just excuse myself, and I just keep going, that things are going to get better. They don't. So actually taking a step back, having a pause, analyzing the situation is how we can move an unhealthy conflict to a healthy conflict. So the pause framework is the following. Prepare. The biggest challenge often in resolving an unhealthy conflict is failing to actually prepare to talk to the person about it and just jumping into it. The first step of preparing is acknowledging internally. My story at the beginning of this talk, I did not acknowledge that I had a conflict. I didn't realize I had an unhealthy conflict. It didn't even occur to me that that was the case. Sometimes we can be in conflict with somebody and not even know we're in conflict. We feel like everything is fine, and they don't. And what that can mean is we go, oh no, we're not in conflict, we just had a disagreement. No. If they feel it was an unhealthy conflict, doesn't matter what you feel. It was an unhealthy conflict. So then we go into the mindset and preparation, which if you look in the worksheet, there's some questions in there that go, why should we actually do this resolution? Why is it in my best interest to resolve this conflict? Why is it in their best interest to resolve this conflict? Trying to get you over this hurdle mentally. And then courage and composure. Talking to somebody about this kind of stuff can be scary. Like we're being vulnerable to somebody, we're putting ourselves on the line, and actually doing it takes a lot of courage. So how do we get over that? The next one is actively listen. Does anybody know what active listening is? Has anybody read the book Radical Candor? Or? Cool, all right. So active listening basically means listen to them. When we're having a disagreement with somebody, often, or even a debate with somebody, I'm not going to ask you to put your hands up, don't worry. How many times have you stopped listening to somebody because you're thinking about what you're going to say after they stop talking? Yeah, that's not active listening. Active listening is trying to suppress that urge and actually understand what they're saying. Sometimes people surprise you. Sometimes people say things that that you don't expect. We build these mental models of other people. Every time we interact with somebody, every time we talk to them, we're building this model of how they interact and what they say. What's the truth about models? All of them are wrong. Some of them are useful. Your model of that person is probably wrong. They're going to say something that surprises you. And so actually listening to them and internalizing what they're saying is important. And acknowledging to them that you're in a conflict is also crucial. Again, you might not feel you're in a conflict. If they feel you're in a conflict and you say to them, we're not in a conflict, that's not going to help them get over the emotions that they're having. You've got to acknowledge to them that you're in a conflict. Then we've got understand. So this is where we're trying to get the person to explain the conflict to us. Tell me about it. Tell me how that made you feel. Tell me what you thought when I said that. Asking open-ended questions. What's an open-ended question? Not yes or no. Yeah. Did that make you feel angry? There's two answers to that question, really, yes or no. How did that make you feel is an open-ended question. Because if I ask, did that make you feel angry, I'm assuming something about you. If I ask an open-ended question, I'm not assuming. And then back to the assuming positive intent. This is something where, again and again, you'll see this come up. Most people don't go to work trying to screw other people over. Some people do. I've worked with some of them. Most people don't. High 99.999% of people go to work because they want to do a good job. The chances of you meeting that one person in your entire company who's a bit of a not nice person, this is being recorded, is pretty low. It does happen, so assume positive intent. Okay, then we've got share. So we've listened to them, we've understood them. Now is our time to share our understanding of the situation. Notice at no point, we're on step 4 of 5 here, and this is the first time we've spoken about our experience. It's really important. You don't talk about your experience until right at the end. You can acknowledge their assumed negative intent. So let's imagine a conflict. You and I are having a conflict. You think that I have chosen this technology because it's going to get me promoted, not because it's the right choice. That's what you say to me. So we've gone through this understanding. I've asked you open-ended questions, and you've said something like, you chose that technology because you'll get promoted if we use it, not because it's the right choice. So when we get to this stage, I say back to you, I understand that you think that I chose this technology to get promoted. You have to repeat that back to them, because otherwise they don't know that you've understood that. But then correct their negative intent, their assumed negative intent. I didn't choose it because that, I chose it because X, Y, and Z. It was the right choice because of scalability, blah, blah, blah. And then talk to your perspective and how you correct it. So we've acknowledged it, we've prepared, we've asked their situation, their understanding, we've corrected it, and then we end with realignment. So what does this mean? Well, make sure that you reiterate common goals with somebody. If you're in a conflict with somebody and there's any misunderstanding that you're not pulling towards the same goal, this is the time for you to correct that. We're both coming to work because we want to build the best software. We're both coming to work because we want to help the users of our software. Whatever that common goal is, this is the point when we reinforce it. Sometimes, somebody at this point asked me a question, which is, what if you don't have common goals? Can anybody think of a situation where you might not have common goals? Has anybody worked for a consultancy? Okay. Do you have salespeople in your consultancy? Salespeople will often have goals that seem different to your goals as an engineer. They have goals that are based on revenue. You have goals that are based on good software, happy customers. So these goals can feel in conflict. Sometimes as executives in companies, we deliberately build a little bit of that into the team structure because you want a little bit of pulling to one side or another. Who works for like a product company, like a SaaS product company? So sometimes you have this in product SaaS companies because you'll have, say, a triad of engineering lead, design lead, product lead. And the engineering lead is pulling towards feasibility, the design lead is pulling towards usability, and the product manager is pulling towards viability. So we like to build these kind of structures in teams sometimes because they breed healthy conflict when done well. But if you can have a situation where this can breed unhealthy conflict, and there, how do you do this first step of realigning common goals when we've deliberately set the structure up to not have common goals? There will still be a common goal. The goal could be, we all want to build great software for users. The goal could be, we all want to make sure the business is successful so we all have jobs. Pretty important right now with the economy the way it is. The goal could be, we just want to come to work and have a good time. Like, there will always be a common goal. You just might need to step outside of a job function to find it. And lastly, just acknowledge and agree that there was a conflict and what you do next time if there is a conflict on the horizon. One of the things that often happens with unhealthy conflicts is they become a reinforcing cycle. You have an unhealthy conflict with somebody, and you never truly resolve it, and so you have another unhealthy conflict, and you never truly resolve that one, and they just reinforce each other. So the very, very last thing on this is to agree what should happen in the future if you have another unhealthy conflict. So you don't let it fester, you don't let it kind of simmer under the hood. You agree to acknowledge it straight away. Any questions on that? Yes? Yes.
So, in your case, like there was a person who approached you and said, like, your choice is pure CV-driven development. But most of the time, it's like actually this conflict is behind your back because your teammates are discussing this and you chose it because you want to be promoted.
Yeah.
But they don't tell you.
Sure. So for the live stream and the recording and the rest of the people in the room, the question there was, sometimes these conflicts can happen and you're not even aware they're happening because they're happening behind your back. So if your team member suspects that you chose this technology because you wanted to get promoted, they might not even tell you about it. Going back to this is where you're lacking that middle one. You don't have mutual respect and trust. If you have a culture where people don't question other people, you don't have trust. Again, we want conflict. We want them to say, are you making the right choice here? So here, if you're not the leader in the team, I would encourage you to speak to your leader. If you are the leader in your team, I would go back to how do I rebuild and trust and respect in this team, because that to me is what's fallen down. If you've got people talking behind other people's back, it's a clear descriptor of a lack of trust in that team.
So on the S step where you're sharing what your perspective is of the situation, correcting their assumed negative intent. What if there's a situation when you correct somebody else's assumed negative intent on your behalf? Sometimes there'll be situations where somebody has already taken action based on that assumption, like, they've been colder to you or they've talked about you behind your back, and now they have a kind of sunk cost into that belief. How would you go about challenging that belief that they hold without just feeding into the unhealthy conflict?
Yeah, so here what I would encourage you to do is to acknowledge their behavior in a compassionate way. So saying to them, I feel like you've been cold to me because this decision that you've been made. I don't want that to define our relationship going forward. I understand why you did that, but I don't want that to define our relationship. So just acknowledging it compassionately and empathetically. Any more questions? Yes. Just wait for the microphone. Oops.
What if in the sharing stage, when you share your perspective, what if it becomes a yes-no situation? I mean, in the extreme case.
Can you give me an example?
I mean, the other party was assuming negative intent, and you share what your real intent is, what your perspective is, and you still don't reach an agreement.
Sure. So if I'm understanding correctly, I think the problem here is they're not accepting your correction of their intent. Or again, we're going all the way back to this. If you don't have these things, you're going to get those kinds of problems. If you don't have respect and trust, if you don't have this assumption of positive intent, you're going to get all of those problems further down the line, which is why I started with this. You're kind of swimming an uphill battle. It's possible to implement this framework in a team that has a massive lack of trust with each other. You're just swimming an uphill battle. I'm mixing my metaphors there. You're swimming uphill to. I'm just imagining people swimming with swords now. You're going to struggle. It's harder, but you can do it. You just need to keep trying and keep pushing. And sometimes it's asking them questions about why they believe that. So one of the things with intent is humans will naturally assume the worst possible interpretation of a set of data. So if you give somebody data, they will assume the worst possible interpretation of it. So what that means is we have to give people more data to help them move towards the right decision. So we have to give them the context, give them the understanding. This is not a plug, but sorry, it is a plug. I'm doing a workshop tomorrow on communication, and one of the really big things in that workshop tomorrow is exactly that. The difference between data and information, and how you can contextualize data to actually evoke the right emotions in people. One last question before we move to finish. Yes? Sure. So the question there was, what if you've got a hierarchy and you've got a leader of leaders, and the leader of leaders is trying to enforce something on the skip level on the road below that? I applaud your desire to fix that problem. I would say it's actually a problem for your manager. You can help your manager. Has anybody heard of the term locus of control? I'm going to go on a complete tangent now, sorry. Yes. So locus of control is the way that we think about the universe and our place in it. You can largely have two loci of control, an internal one or an external one. People who have an external locus of control say the universe is happening to them, and they don't have control over it. People who have an internal locus of control believe that everything in the universe happens because of them. Both these extremes are bad. Somewhere in the middle is good. I actually genuinely applaud that idea of you're taking ownership over that problem, and you're moving that locus of control further in you to say that you have an ability to impact the world through your behaviors. So I applaud that, but I think this has a whole bunch of unintended consequences if you try and tackle it, one of which being, how's your boss going to feel? And so if you're going to tackle that situation, at the very least, your boss and you need to work together to tackle it. You definitely don't want to tackle that by yourself. Last question. So the question was, what do I think about team building events? Great idea, bad implementation. So the problem they're solving is a genuine problem. It's what I said earlier about mandated fun time. Between the hours of 4 and 5 o'clock on a Friday, we're going to schedule in fun. It doesn't really work. They can work when you already have a trusting dynamic with a team to keep that ongoing. But especially remotely, they don't work too well to build trust in the first place. I would much rather just get everybody together for a meal and just talk for an hour. Genuinely, last question. Go on. Yeah, so the comment there was a good idea could be just to have beer with somebody. Maybe you could go to an escape room. I like that kind of stuff because it's more social, it's more what people enjoy. Okay, so we're going to wrap up now. So like I said, I like to give you things to take away. I didn't get to talk about it. If you want to know more about what I do as a job, which is teaching and training technology leaders, that's the first QR code. Second QR code is the worksheet in case you missed it. Third QR code is an entirely free training course that's about an hour long that helps you with dealing with tricky conversations with people, takes you through the process. There's worksheets in that as well. And I do a lot of posting on LinkedIn, videos, articles, blog posts. I do live streams on a fortnightly basis. If you want to follow me and I talk about all of this kind of stuff, follow me on LinkedIn. Thank you very much.